Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Aya.
Hi.
Aya, Aya, you look like the type of person that has all the answers to the universe.
Maybe.
Well, why don't you
I think it's
uh,
just the yeah. Go
I was
ahead.
why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
So I'm Aya, also known as Satsuki. I run a podcast called Stories of Saniwa. So in that podcast, I discuss about the tales behind Japanese swords.
Okay, hold on. The podcasts are so niche nowadays. Like someone will be doing one on like an actor, someone will be doing on a specific item.
Mhm.
But why Japanese swords? What sparked your interest? I think as a kid, like I had one in my house. It was rusted shut, so you couldn't pull it out of the actual like casing of it. But then we finally, like I think when I was like 13, 14 years old, after like just months and months of trying, I finally got it out. But you could drop a hair on it and it would split the hair right in half just by falling right on top of it.
Yeah, I think it started off because as a kid, I really enjoyed anime and video games. And in anime, they have like this genre for historical stories. And but those stories, they are not like what you can see, like for example you watch the Tudors or the Crown. It's not like that, so it's more like an over exaggerated version of their history. But mostly if you follow the timeline, it is actually pretty accurate. So that is what sparked my interest on Japanese swords. And um f- in Ja- for us, I think we don't put a lot of value on weapons in our history. I don't know if in American history it's the same, but in Japanese history, I found that when I read their history, there are also mentions of the names of each swords or each weapons that are used for every historical event, and that is, I think, what sparked my interest. Actually, when I was starting to just get into it, there is a story about the creation of Japan, and it was actually a sword that was behind the creation of Japan, according to their myths. So that is really what got my interest in that subject.
Well, it's funny because like if you look anywhere, a lot of people, even nowadays, if you ask somebody if there was an item that would mean so much to them, that would be just kind of like how a samurai sword or a sword would be used in Japan culture, for instance. Like they keep the swordsmiths, the name of it is inside of the hilts of the blade sometimes, and it's written on there. But even now, like there are very few. I think it takes 5 years to become a swordsmith, and then it also takes they only it's a very very niche career, I would say, because they only have like 50 something people in all of Japan that are swordsmiths. So it's like you would come across a lot of like you would see rare blades and you would see the most common ones in each kind of different level of it. But imagine having an item that literally is like your family, your honor, a representation of you. I mean, if you asked a person now what would be like a good item for them, they'd be like my cell phone. It's like back then this was like be handed down generations. I mean, it would be used in battle. I mean, one of the most outrageous things were kind of like I would say insane acts, but it's the most honorable is the honorable death, where you would take your samurai sword, and that's when I started getting interested in it. It was it's going to sound stupid, but the Wolverine movie, when they were found the cure for him to make him finally die. Well, when the bombs were being dropped, you saw all these guys that would take these swords and stab themselves, and it was like this overall feeling of, oh my God, like to know that you rather have this be an honorable death than rather face whatever's to come. And it's like this, you realize how much of an innovation, and not only an innovation, but how much this really impacted their history. I mean, to value something with your life, an item, I mean, it's fascinating.
Yeah, actually, in the Japanese emperor, they have their what they're called the regalia. So they are three items, and one of them is actually a sword. And it is rumored that that sword was actually the one that I was talking about earlier in the myth, that that was the one that created Japan supposedly, but nobody except the emperor supposedly has seen it. So we don't really know if that exists or not. And also, there are a lot of swords myths before. They are in what they call the schools, and that is different from what we call school now. So school, like an organization of swordsmiths that studied under one particular great swordsman, swordsmith, sorry. So, and they all have their own styles. So the experts, they can distinguish what style it is that is used in creating a sword. And I'm sorry. um and but now there, as you have said, there are only a few swordsmiths in Japan, but that was because it was regulated back in World War II, because after all the war crimes that Japan has committed, they are practically limited to just using swords for martial arts.
Yeah, and it's interesting too because the idea behind the sword as well is like they believe that if it was done correctly and done properly, that it could actually cleanse evil. Like it was something that could banish away bad spirits, which I love the fascination. I love the folklore behind it because if you look through any Japanese folklore, any types of myth that they have, there's always a person with a sword that has to take down like a dragon, has to take down some type of monster, some type of evil force, and it's just inspiring to really see. I mean, the fact that you would have like how many people have things that are from other generations? Like in America, for instance, we go to ancestry.com and we try and find out where our heritage come from. But imagine having a blade that your great 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 grandfather held, or something like that, that literally is your heritage right in front of you. That is, it's seen in a different light. It's seen in a better value when nowadays, I mean, we don't really have a whole lot from our ancestors. Some people have like maybe a coat of arms, depending on if your family decided not to bundle it up at a yard sale or something. And it's like that's what I love about it. Like that's why I mean it's fascinating. Whenever you see shows or something, there's always to do with the giant ass samurai sword, like Mortal Kombat style. Like that game should have sparked popularity in that item.
Yeah. Actually, for example, in Wolverine, he also had a sword created by Muramasa, by a
Yeah.
man named Muramasa, right? So that was actually based from a real person in Japanese history. So he was also named Muramasa, and it was said that the sword he created has a curse that will bring down the shogun of that time. So when there was an uprising to bring down the shogun, all the people that were against the current shogun, they had swords made by that swordsmith so that they can bring bad luck to the soldiers of the shogun. So
It,
that was interesting for.
well, through doing your podcast, what's like the most interesting thing? Like you said, a blade that created Japan. Like, what's the story behind that?
Oh, that was actually a spear. It was I will actually be making an episode that will tackle that further. But basically, it was two gods, Amaterasu and her brother. They were given that spear and they looked down on Earth from the bridge that connects the heavens to the Earth. And then they put the spear down and cut the lance. And that is what created Japan as it is.
Yeah, if you look at like for instance Spartan history, like it was about a bond between brothers, the people that you would fight in the war with. But imagine in like with samurai swords, it's a bond between the item. Like it's not just a weapon, it's an art form. Like, things that are stylistically done, but at the same time show strength, show honor. I mean, the better looking that they are, it really shows that an effort into the work that you created it for. And you're taking that into battle. So to develop a connection with an item where it feels like you have a shield, like when kids are little, for instance, they have a blanket and that keeps the monsters away when you put it up over your head or something. Well, for these people going into battle, they had a samurai sword. That was their protection. That was this thing that felt like, depending on how it was made, depending how much, confidence they had in it, depending, it was a way of feeling safe, and so much times, especially with war. But, you know, for everybody over here, like in America, it's like, why didn't they just pick up a gun? Why don't they do that? I was like, because there was an honor in this. You know, you would never kill a person when their back was turned. You would never do things that would dishonor your family, or even if it was just to get an upper hand or to win, it was seen as dishonorable. You wanted to make it as fair as possible and just let skill overall be the winner. You know, see who would win between a one on one battle, you know, have these insane matches where it wasn't just you were defending your own life, but you were defending everyone that you were fighting for.
Yeah. Actually, there was also a story about this man. He was an anti-shogun activist at that time, and he was one of those who preferred the modern technology over samurai. So he was given the sword that is passed down from generations in his family so that he can fight against the shogun. But then he preferred the American technology or the European technology. So he always carries a gun with him, and he was literally the guy who brings a gun to a sword fight. And he was actually assassinated, and on his last moments he still preferred the sword over the gun, and that's why he was actually killed, because he was not fast enough in drawing his sword.
That's
That
crazy because eventually, through American innovation, they ended up taking swords and putting guns inside the hilts of the blades. So it'd be like you would be ready for a sword fight, and then you would just pop off the end of it, and it'd be a pistol, and it would shoot like one bullet or something. It could only hold one, and it would hit the enemy. It's like it's weird to see the combinations. Like you would see like a lot of my samurai knowledge, I would say, comes off movies. Obviously, you know, you actually are getting the actual history facts, but the different fighting styles, the different stances. I mean, it's still an effective weapon over there today. I mean, it still holds honor. It really hasn't degraded when a lot of things throughout history, especially things that we used to love back in the day, such as like muskets or some type of weapon of choice or something, has evolved into a new form and has kind of lost value. But the samurai sword is one that has lasted literally through the ages because the connection with it.
Mhm. I think it was actually because first the Japanese religion is it states that the soul of the owner is connected with the sword itself. So sometimes the sword is named after its master, like Muramasa, or say Kanesada. But then there are also they are also very superstitious about naming their swords. Like, for example, this one sword, it kept losing battles because the name was like literally the name is translated into crying lion. So they say that if you change the name back to its original form, which is uh, bone cutter or knee cutter, sorry, then it will win battles. And when the owner changed its name, even though maybe it was a coincidence, it started winning a lot of battles. So I guess that is where they put a lot of value um on their items.
Do you think that's a confidence thing though? Like imagine you're running into a war or battle and your samurai sword is named like Crybaby Wet Pants. You know, you're if you name your blade like the Burning Valkyrie, you're probably gonna win a lot more than if your sword is named after something that sounds like feeble or minuscule, you know, like small ant. It's like you're going to have a way better probably like confidence in your weapon. I think that's part and parcel of what really goes with the samurai sword too. It's like you got to actually trust in your weapon as much as you would trust in yourself. It's same thing with fighting in the trenches, you know, with like for the Spartans for instance. They're fighting together. It was more of like a love, but a brotherhood, a protection, knowing that if you're putting your life in this person's hands, they're doing the same with you. You both have to protect each other. It's the same thing with your samurai sword. If you don't have confidence in your weapon, next thing you know, you're gonna go to fight and you're not gonna trust that your blade's gonna be able to, you know, match up to the skill. Even if you build it up like some type of superstition, like the blade has a mind of its own or has a soul of its own. It's the concept of like you gotta trust in your tools.
Yeah, I think that is also a factor in that, because like I said, there the myth of Muramasa. So Muramasa was a swordsmith that I was talking about earlier with the cursed blades. So even if during the time of the uprising against the shogun, some soldiers were carrying counterfeits of Muramasa, but because they believed that it was Muramasa, I think that gave them confidence on fighting against the shogun. And even the prince Akihito, he led the soldiers against the shogun, and he also believed in that curse. So he also carried a Muramasa, even though Muramasa is not really entitled to make swords for royalty that time.
Yeah, if you look at like what the mindset was back then when they created these samurai swords and they looked at it now, like someone from 1,000 years ago looking at today of what we use them for, you see a random dude on the internet chopping a bunch of 2 liter cokes in half with a samurai sword. I'm just like, oh my God, like this used to be a weapon that you would carry into war and be like, my father died. This is his sword. My father's in this sword. And then you just see some dude cutting up like 2 liters of coke with a samurai sword in one swing. And I'm like, what's happening, man? Like this used to be like honor, value. Now it's like, oh, it's going to be YouTube subscribers. It's like, why did that shift happen?
I think it's because of the spread in popular culture, I think. So um like I said, the Japanese love to exaggerate their history. Like if you watch or play Sengoku Basara, it is a video game. It also has an anime. So you can see that there are a lot of Western elements incorporated into that, but it is actually a retelling of the Great War that united Japan. So how if you watch it, there are like samurais riding motorcycles and stuff like that, and even a robot fighting. But yeah, so I think that is what gained more popularity in the Western world than what it is here in Asia. Because here in Asia, we actually fear the samurai.
Yeah, it's funny how the culture has kind of shifted, with all these new animes that are coming out and everything. Everybody seems to have like a samurai sword sitting inside of their house. Like I know at least 5 or 6 friends that just have one hanging on the wall in the back. And I'm like, what is that for? Like, are you fighting like wars that I don't know about? And they're just like, no, it's just for decoration. And I'm like, I get it. I mean, they do look awesome, especially if they're done properly. I mean, a samurai sword, it is like when you hold one, it feels like you have all the power of the universe. And I think that's the confidence that's kind of needed when you have this. But you see, like, maybe it's kind of like a love for the lost art. Like a lot of people watching these animes are kind of realizing like, well, there was actual stuff that we're escaping. There's amazing things about history, much like you probably know through like studying it and uncovering all these stuff. Like there is seems like be a trend of people that are looking back at history and trying to collect old objects, fossils, minerals, all these types of things because they're realizing, well, technology is cool and all, but there's some old stuff that is actually pretty neat.
Yeah, I think it is also thanks to this type of media that the popularity of this ancient art really gained more popularity nowadays since of course since the World War II, Japan lost a lot of its artifacts. So a lot of swords were actually confiscated and thrown into the sea. So most of the swords that I study are actually some of them are actually missing, and we only have like drawings and written details of how long they are, how sharp they are, who used them. And because of the popularity, a lot of fans, even from not only from Asia, but uh, Asia, Japan, but even from the West, they are they are putting more interest into learning more about this sword. And they actually had a lot of GoFundMe so that the smiths that are in Japan right now, they can recreate these swords
Wait,
and
why did they throw them
display
in
it
the
in the
ocean?
museum.
Why did they throw
I
them in
th-
the ocean?
it's because of after World War II, a lot of the Japanese soldiers they have samurai swords with them. Aside from the swords and aside from the guns and the bombs and everything. So a lot of the war crimes that are committed by the Japanese soldiers are actually by the sword. Like for example, here in my country, a lot of people actually died from the sword instead of the gun or anything. So it is one of the limitations put into into Japan, that they had to confiscate a lot of the swords and throw them into the sea because metal rusts in the ocean and
Yeah.
things like that.
I mean, terrible for the whales that are out there, but I guess good for the
Mhm.
the civilization or the community. But like, that's a really intimate act. There's a difference between like stabbing somebody and shooting somebody. Shooting somebody when you have a gun in your hand, there's no emotion behind it. You don't have to have a personal vendetta, but to walk up and stab somebody. You gotta hate that person to do that. So that just shows you like the type of like hardness, I would say, of a person that would, fight with them. Where like I know slicing somebody's head off, that was a punishment. And I'm like, yo, like throw me in jail. I'm okay with that. Like a full clean slice, something like that. Like that's their whole thing, was trying to be as accurate as possible, and one that was truly accurate. I've heard samurai stories where like a dude could hit you, like nick you a thousand times and you still wouldn't die. You would just be experiencing pain. I'm like, the precision, the accuracy, the amount of training that goes into that. I mean, I don't know if you've ever fake sword fighted anybody before. It's not easy. It's pretty difficult. Like I took martial arts and it was like I was just getting my ass whooped. But you think it's gonna be just like the movies where you can like, oh, you're gonna be the best. You're gonna be doing like Star Wars type moves. You're flipping up and down and stuff. No, no, it's not like that at all. You get poked. It's like lancing or what is it? Jousting. It's freaking difficult. It
Mhm.
doesn't make sense to me. It's like a skill you have to train and train and train and train and train. That's why they use wood swords, as practice and stuff. You're supposed to get hurt on that aspect of things because it teaches you this is what you want to avoid when you're in battle.
Mhm. um about that, because a lot of, I think, Japanese, because they have the bushido, the way of samurai. So in the bushido they believe that the soul is connected to the head, so that's why they cut off the head of their enemies even though they are already dead. The honorable that, so it's not just stabbing the stomach. So for someone to have an honorable death, they have to have some, what they call, assistant or second. So that assistant, they, after you collapse dead, they have to cut off your head to make sure you're dead.
Oh, oh man. It's crazy because a buddy of mine, his name's James Morris. He's actually doing his
Mhm,
master's degree out in Taiwan. He's studying
mhm,
gravestones and trying to find out learn a little bit more about the history of them too, because for a long period of time people did not care about gravestones. If somebody died, they wouldn't put they had a gravestone or something. During all the wars and battles that were going on, people would just knock them down. So many people are trying to trace their roots and they can't because they don't have an object. Well, it makes sense. Like if you have an object such as like a samurai sword, there's your roots, there's your heritage. You don't need a gravestone. You have something like this. And that's why during parts of the conflicts and battles that they were having, when they were coming over there and getting raided, they were just destroying the grave plots because they didn't know that this was the only way that these people were tracking their heritage. They thought they might have had a samurai sword or something, which is fascinating because honestly, instead of having a $10,000 grave plot, I'd rather have a samurai sword with like their name engraved into it. That's something I can carry around and show off when I'm doing
mhm.
dinner parties or things of that sort. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and it is true actually that some of the samurai warriors, they are buried with their swords, and that is why a lot of grave robbers, they dig up those samurai lords in order to steal that great sword that they possess. There is actually one sword that is passed down in the Masamune clan. They are one of the unifiers in Japan. So the son of this guy, he got the sword and died right after, and then someone dug him up again and took his sword, and then that guy who dug him up also died. So the sword was said to be cursed and something like that. But yeah, all most of them, they wanted to be buried with their sword, like, it's their most prized possession. Otherwise they just pass it down from within their family. I think the Hideyoshi clan, they are the great unifiers of Japan. Um they have their family heirloom with them until 2013, and then they just gave it up for the museum so that it can be taken care of.
Oh, I thought you meant like to give it up to pay rent before you said museum. I was like, why would you like can you imagine that like let's say your family moves to a whole other country and then like after years upon years upon years, like generations I'd say, your great grandfather, you have a samurai sword, but you don't know anything about the history because always one person in the family tends to like never tell anybody or just like forget, just doesn't care about it. So then next thing you know, if you don't have it recorded somewhere, you end up losing it. It's like, what is this sword? It's like that was your great, and then we don't have enough time. We got to go get our dinner date or something like that. And it's like when that happens, imagine if that was you and you have your great grandfather's sword and you take it to a pawn shop and say times are getting tough. And they have a person come in who's, this is his study, tries to see if it's real or not, like one of those Pawn Star shows. They open it up and they see that the name on the blade is a guy that murdered thousands upon thousands of people with this sword. So you're sitting there praying to your great grandfather's sword, thinking it's this peace and honor bringer, when really it's massacred thousands of people. That's information you kind of want to write down. Like that's not something you don't want to lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Actually, in Japan, they actually use swords to pay off their debts as well. So, for example, we
wait,
have,
wait. This is like gambling. This is like
yeah.
aces high. I'm putting all my cards on the table except you're putting up your samurai sword.
Yeah, there are masterless swordsmen, so we call them Ronin. If you know, Rurouni Kenshin, Samurai X, whatever. Ronin are masterless swordsmen, and because they don't have a master, they don't have salary, so they have to fend for their own. So sometimes they have to sell their swords and say that it is made by this swordsmith. It is worth this much. So can you just buy it off for me so I can have my family live another day, something like that. And also bandits in the mountains, they also steal swords from swordsmen that passes by so that they can sell it off.
Is it kind of like also during war times, like you never really see a lot of those people pick up another person's samurai sword or something, and you would think that would be like a trophy kill. Like, if a person that collects a bunch of like if you ever seen Star Wars, General Grievous, for instance, his
Mm,
lightsabers come from the Jedi's he's killed. You would think that, if you were another samurai fighting, you would pick up one of these swords to claim, so at least like, hey, but I guess it was such an honorable thing to them, where it was like
mhm.
they must die with their sword. Even their enemies thought that as well.
Yeah, actually, during the war times, if somebody dies, their body gets sent back to their family with the sword.
Well, who's going by and collecting all the bodies and swords? That seems like a really rough job.
Yeah, but in some famous swordsmen, like their head will be sent off to the master who ordered them to be uh to be killed, but their sword, it will be sent back to the family because it is such an important part of that swordsman. So it is it is part of it is an honorable thing to do for them to send back the sword to their family to know that hey, your dad is dead.
Yeah.
Here's his sword.
And the last kind of piece to them, they would build like a shrine and stuff too in honor, light
Uh-huh.
candles and things of that sort. That happens kind of down here during the war times, at least World War II and World War I. Troops were picking up like journals, watches, photos, things that would give to a loved one or a family member so they could still remember that their kid or whoever died in battle. It's a rough decision too, because if you look at like you when we think of war, we look at the other side as the enemy rather than looking at it as another person that thinks we're the enemy too. It's just in our minds, it's built up that they're the evilest thing out there. So to put your life on the line to protect your family, and imagine not coming back home, you were hoping to God that someone would take something back to your loved ones or your family members, so at least they'll have a little piece of you. Don't send your head back or anything, but at the same time, like you're over there in a whole nother place and you get lost and your family doesn't know where you're at. You could be missing. I mean, that pain has to be horrible. At least you have something to remember them by, like a sword or something.
Hmm. Yeah. And so a lot of lords do that. It's the honorable. I think yeah, it is the honorable thing to do for them. In here, just war times, like you just get informed that your father is dead or that your brother is dead, but there you get sent back a sword souvenir, and it still gets passed down in the family unless it gets you sell it off, or you it gets stolen from you by somebody else, or a lord buys it off from you, a lord orders that it can be confiscated from you.
Do you think you could survive back then, like in this time period that you studied?
No, not a chance.
I feel like I'd park my horse wrong or something, and then I would get like beat up, or then the next thing you know, I'm like losing my samurai sword or something. But I would be the type like I would definitely want to get like a small little shack somewhere in the mountains, and then I would just have like a collection of swords. Like I wouldn't take them from anybody, but I would buy them on my own. But like each one for a different thing, have like I like giving names to items like that. Like I like to put personification in items. People call their cars like a girl, or they'll call their cars like
uh,
baby or something like that. I'm like, same thing kind of with a samurai sword. You're putting something personification on an item so it will mean more to you. We do that with animals and things of that sort. And it's a little bit easier when you're able to think of something that is an important part of your family's history, give it a name, give it a title, and hold it with such honor, because you're going to learn to cherish it and take more care of it so it actually lasts generations. The fact that you said that that one tribe or that one clan in around 2013 gave up their samurai sword to a museum, to me that looks like, oh my god, why would you want to lose, even if it's for the benefit of history, just in a selfish way? Like, why would you want to lose your family's heritage? But that's a tough decision to make.
mhm. But technically, it is still their possession, but they just gave it up to the museum so that a lot more people can see it, because around that time the interest in swords is rising in Japan, and they are holding a lot of exhibits with those famous swords like the Tenkagoken. They actually have a hierarchy of swords in Japan. Like they have the five most beautiful swords in Japan and things like that, and the five greatest swordsmiths in Japan. So around that time, the interest was rising. So the family thought that it was a good thing to contribute to history and let more people see the family heirloom rather than just keep it in their storage, since keeping it in storage, the sword will get brittle.
Yeah, what would you say would be the worst thing you've ever learned about through the history of these samurai swords? Like, what's one simple little like event?
Mhm.
I would think
I think
chopping somebody's head off would be a pretty bad one.
uh-huh. I think um it is this guy. He was a monk. He served his master very loyally, and he actually died while standing up. So the enemies did not know that he is dead, and they just continued to shoot him with arrows, and he was like fighting them so that his master can commit the honorable death,
God
and he died
damn.
standing up.
Hold
Yeah.
on. So wait, he was protecting his master so his master could do
Uh-huh.
an honorable death, and he died
Hmm.
standing up, and they just continued to fire arrows at him thinking he was still alive?
Yeah. Like it was a myth, and I think it was considered to be true. So these two are one of the great warriors of the Heian era. So that was before a lot of the historical data in Japan were written down, and this was just a story passed down to generations, and it's still a pretty popular story. There is even a nursery rhyme in Japan about this, that this guys he loved his master very much because he vowed to kill 1,000 samurai, and his master just happened to be the thousandth one that he encountered, and he lost to that master, so he vowed to serve that master forever. And then when his master's brother was out to kill him, he bought time for his master so that his master can go to his house and commit the honorable death before his brother can get to him. And when a lot of he was famous for that feat of killing 999 soldiers. So the soldier of the brother was actually very afraid of him, so they just tried to kill him by shooting arrows, and those who were brave enough to approach him, he cut them down immediately. And so they tried to put damage on him using arrows. And I think it was a long time before they realized that the guy was not moving anymore.
I like the 999th arrow. He's like, hey, yeah, he's not moving. I think he might be dead.
Yeah, that's when they approach him. But at that time, his master was already successful in committing the honorable death. So Japan actually uses that as an example of what loyalty really is.
Do you think like do you ever try and put yourself in the shoes of someone that does an honorable death, like to get to the point where like you know that there's no hope, you rather end your own life in your own hands and rather than face the enemy and die at their hands or something like that? Like that takes a lot of like no hope left to be able to commit something like that, which is like it can be seen as a sign of strength or it can be seen as a sign of weakness. I think the way that they're thinking of it was like, I don't want to lose. Like for me, if you're asking me, my instance, I don't want to die by some person. I rather take myself out, like as in like a heroic event, like saving a kid from a bus or something. But then like at the same time, like to have the courage and strength because it is a brave thing as well too to take your own life. I mean, if anybody tries to poke their stomach with a sword, I'm pretty sure as soon as it breaks the first layer of skin, you're like, ouch, that really hurts. I don't want to do this anymore. Like I take it back. So to see them go all the way through with it, it's like in one swift motion, but it's such strength and such confidence when it happens.
Hmm. It's there. Again, it goes back to the samurai code of Bushido that you would want to die by your hands because that means that you did not lose to your enemies.
What would you say, in your opinion, for instance, what's the most fascinating thing that you've learned so far?
Oh, the fascinating thing I learned so far is that they believe that swords can cure illnesses, like very specific illnesses.
Wait, like Reiki energy, where they just wave a sword on top of you and then it cures, like you got a broken leg, it fixes it like that, or like maybe like a certain type of sickness.
Yeah, I actually read about the sword that can cure cancer in their
What?
yeah, not really cancer, but it is in Japanese it is tumor, so you can say that it is still cancer. So they just put it is enshrined in one of their temples, and they say that when they pray over you using that sword, your cancer will be cured.
You got to think that there's one dude out there that thinks that blade holds all the cancer it's ever cured. And then, like, you could stab somebody and transfer all that cancer into that person. So even if they don't die by the blade, they die later of like a horrible, insane disease.
Well, the thing is that those who are allowed to use it were priests, so I don't think they would be using that for that purpose.
What Bible and God are they talking to that lets them carry a samurai sword? You're a priest. You're supposed to have the cross hanging around the neck. You're not supposed to be doing any conflict. I've always wanted to visit like Taiwan or something to be able to go up into the mountains and go to one of these temples because like the aspect of like I watched a video where a monk for 31 hours stood on a pole, one leg, just one leg up, one leg on the pole, and all he did to survive or eat, he ate glass. And I was like, how do you get your body to that point where like it's literally what people are finding now with all like these articles about finding the ultimate frequency, which is a level
Mhm,
that you can get to in type of meditation like a lucid dream but you're awake, like astral projection style things. And
mhm,
it's a frequency that if you can hit it, you can come out of the concept of space and time that we all kind of go by. And it's like they're spending their whole life trying to find that form of enlightenment, trying to find that inner peace, points of not really like experiencing what we would say fun would be. Like there's no technology, there's no having sex, there's no getting drunk, there's no smoking weed, there's none of that stuff, no watching anime. They're just sitting there praying and just looking inside of themselves for years. I mean, 80, 70 something years. And you're like, what? The amount of commitment that is something that is, I mean, admirable.
Mm-hmm. In Japan, they have their own religion. It's called Shinto. So, it has a lot of roots from Buddhism, I think, but it also has those mythological things that is very unique to Japan. So, in Shinto, they believe that, for example, swords can cure cancer, and then also for a lot of swordsmiths they make swords just to offer to the gods in the temples, and these swords are so huge, like one sword that I read about is about a ton. So nobody not a real no real person can carry that, a sword that heavy, but they say that it is made for the gods, and that god can be the only thing that can then that can swing that sword.
Kind of like people search for immortality now is just being remembered throughout history, having a statue built
Mhm.
after you or something. In Japan, art so I'm gonna ask you a question. If you could be the best ruler, the most feared, and have a statue built after you, or would you rather die honorably and make one of the biggest sacrifices but most honorable sacrifices and you'd get a statue built after you? Which one would you choose?
I think I want to be remembered doing the honorable thing.
Because
So
you
I
would
think
you
that's an
there's a
Asian
giant
culture
yeah,
thing.
there's a giant difference between being having a statue built after you that you can admire just because you're the ruler, and then there's a difference when it comes to the aspect of imagine sacrificing yourself. Like all these legends and lore, the part and parcel of why I really love to learn about them is because a lot of them are like pretty kind of crazy when it gets down to the story part. Like you fought a dragon, then the dragon turned him into stone, and it's like, all right, how much of this is actually true? But it's a concept of like, imagine you're going up against 1,000 samurai and you're the last, like, you're basically sacrificing yourself so other people can escape to try and find a better place, a safe place to survive and keep the community going. And you sacrifice yourself that way. You just wait for them to come and they have a statue built after you that's just raising a sword up in the air. And I'm like, that is more honorable to me, even though you don't get to experience the statue, but being literally solidified in history of your country's survival or your community's survival, your tribe's survival.
Mhm. I think that is what most of the warriors that I read about in Japanese history thought, because they always say that what they're doing is for the betterment of their lord, for the betterment of their region, for the country, something like that. It's never about themselves. Like they want to be the most famous samurai out there or anything. They want to have a purpose and serve this one lord for what they think is is a good cause.
Yeah. It's kind of crazy to see when you look at like all the old folklore and legends and like a lot of the statues, especially in Japan and even in some other countries over there, is they're more not really about the amount of power that person had. They're more about the honor. Like a lot of the
Mhm.
statues that are built after people are like people that were like the last gleaming light of hope, much like memorials are for us down here. And we have a few memorials, sure, but nothing that really sparks like, especially even if it's not 100% true, but a little kid walking by a statue and seeing like this person put his life on the line to defend the people that he loved, like that idea, that concept is something that can last an impact, whether it's 100% true or not. It's something that a lot of people need. Like, there was a thing happening recently on Twitter, which was Helen Keller was not real. She wasn't a real person. I don't know if you know who Helen Keller is.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
well,
know her.
they said that she wasn't real. And I was like, it makes a little bit of sense if you tell a bunch of kids when they're growing up and trying to find out what they want to do with their life that a person that is
Mhm.
blind, deaf, and literally so handicapped, but they accomplish so much, then you don't have an excuse. It gives people this rise and this challenge or pursuit of trying to become something. So it would make sense on that aspect of things. But they do have photographs and everything. So at the same time, you gotta be like, look, we actually have the evidence. This isn't like written and painted. This is 100% photographic proof. But it's a concept of like there's a reason why these myths, these folklore, these legends are that, because they're meant to inspire you. They're meant to keep you motivated to move forward. You know, it's like motivational speaking, except a little bit less Gary V and a little bit more mythology, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. Japanese, they love their history so much that I think they have a lot of written history, and even the swords. There is a specific book that is that details which sword was used in this battle, who used it, who and things like that, who made it, how long it is, and it is very detailed, and that is why I really loved reading about Japanese history. Whereas here in my country, there is a lot of missing pieces in our history. So like for example what you said about Helen Keller, I think the same thing is happening in our country with a certain event. I would not be detailing that because it's too political. But yeah, the same thing is happening in here, that people are trying to rewrite, so to say, the history. But in Japan, I think aside from the World War II crimes, a lot of their history is actually very accurately written down, and that's why I love reading about it.
Yeah, kind of like it's kind of hard when your history in your own country doesn't have a lot of the stuff written down. But if you look at
Mhm.
something like Japan's, where their history is like, it's pretty well categorized, like it's been written down. It's kind of like what interests me, for instance, like I don't know where my family comes from. I'm a bunch of like mixture of British, German, all these things all into one. But then like I have a couple friends who used to be like Mormon or something like that. And the thing about the Mormon religion is that from the start, they have journals from their ancestors. So my buddy has a journal of his great 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 grandfather that fought the Indians and things of that sort, all written down, like if you were hearing it from a first person's perspective. And I was like, that's amazing because you have the most recorded history of your own family, rather than me going and paying some person who does genealogy to try and tell me that, like, well, I found a person with the same last name as you 4 countries away. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure my family's never even been over there. You're just finding names that have the same name as mine. That's not finding my history. That's just looking and finding someone that has a coincidental last name.
Mm-hmm. And the same for me, because I don't really know. My family is also all over the place in Asia, so I don't really know my history very well, my personal history. So in Japan, they have family crests and all that, so you would know what branch of family you are. Like, this crest belongs to the main family, you are just a branch family, so this is a little bit of uh redrawing of the original crest and things like that. And you can also find it in the artifacts that your family keeps. So if you're like an old, very known family, like for example, Mitsubishi, we all know Mitsubishi because
They make
they make the
cars.
cars.
Yeah.
Yeah. So their family crest is actually the one that is in the car. So you know your Mitsubishi if you use that family crest. So they have their kimonos embroidered with that family crest and things like that. And if you're a branch family, it may be just another revision of that original crest. So you know you're part of the Mitsubishi family and things like that.
Wow. I did not know that. That's awesome. I was like, I just started thinking, I was like, imagine people wearing Ford kimonos, like the Ford Mustang. Like, just is that the family crest for the Ford? But that shows heritage too, and that shows class. That's also a really good advertising sales pitch. Is like, now you're part of the Mitsubishi family. Literally. It's like, wow, that's amazing. You learn so much through history too. I bet doing this podcast, like obviously it's a passion too. But
Mhm.
just learning more and more every day has to be the funnest thing ever, because you never know what the next day is going to hold.
Yeah, I think it is my break from my day job is really stressful, and it's really a far cry from learning history. So after work, I will just sit down and read about these swords and learn about this history. So it is a good way to learn about new stuff and also to practice my Japanese. And
Well, be honest. There's probably some days you come home from work and you look at one of those stories or something and you go, "I wish it was this person that I ran into at work today." There's always that. I put myself in those situations all the time. I'm watching a documentary or something of like old school, like maybe a true crime thing, and I'm like, I know who I would pick to be put in that position. I could tell you that. I could tell you
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. Um, the Jap- I think I also relax by watching the historical dramas of Japanese people. So they have this year-long historical dramas that one channel in Japan runs that is tackling just one person every year. So I learn a lot from that, and it was really made well. Like for example, there is this one guy that they called the God of War, but he was just a normal warrior before, but because he was so good at fighting and he kept winning his battles, he became the God of War in Japan, something like that. So I think that is very different from say Roman or Greek
Yeah.
mythology, where the gods, we don't really know if they exist, just the temples and everything. But
Yeah.
this person, he really walked the earth and fought battles with his retainers, and then he got worshipped as the god of war because of that.
Yeah, the closest you would see in Greek and Roman mythology is if they talk about Achilles, they'll talk about that he was blessed by the god of war. He was blessed by a
Mhm.
god. They're not the physical, actual god. Imagine that title that you hold the samurai sword in your family, and your great, 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 great grandfather was known as the god of war. Like you have a. That's a lot of pressure. That's like being Elon Musk's kid. Like you kind of have to represent. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think the God of War's great 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 grandson is now an actor, if I'm correct.
Oh.
They
Wow. Tell me he's like a killer in a movie or something. Like you got to live up to at least a little bit of that legacy.
yeah, I think he starred in that drama portraying his great 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 grandfather or something as a samurai
It's like
but he
you,
was not the main character,
oh,
no.
man. It's like imagine that your great 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 grandfather was the god of war, and you star in Twilight. Like, come on, man. You went the complete opposite way we wanted you to go.
Yeah, imagine being the vampire in it.
Well, look, you've given me enough of your time. Where can people find your podcast? Where can people like look it up, find you? Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Anchor.
My anchor is Stories of Saniwa. You can listen to it in Spotify or anywhere else that you listen your podcast to. I also have a Twitter. It's at Stories of Saniwa. And you can also support the podcast by going to my Ko-fi. So that's kofi.com/Stories of Saniwa.
And I'll make sure to link it all in the description. And thank you for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank podcast.